Voters head to the polls tomorrow for the West Virginia primary. Several Republicans are vying for the Senate seat. Our Megan Marshall talked to some candidates and has more.
May 12th is the West Virginia primary. One of the races voters will decide on is the Republican Party nominee for the West Virginia Senate seat. The candidates are Brian McKinney, Alexander Gasserud, incumbent Shelley Moore Capito, Tom Willis, David Perkey, and Janet McNulty. Alexander Gasserud is a native West Virginian and Davis and Elkins College graduate who has spent his career in the private sector. He says growing up in a generation that counted down the minutes to leave the state is exactly what drives him to fight for it now.
Jobs are a big issue here in West Virginia. We don't have a lot of good paying jobs, but more importantly, our dilapidated infrastructure is a big issue. We wake up in countless communities across this state and bathe and drink in poisonous water every single day. We're not connected to the internet like we need to be in the 21st century.
Gasserud's promise to West Virginians is this:
to continue to secure our borders, to unlock our energy potential and use our God-given resources beneath our feet to power our nation and employ West Virginians, and ultimately send a real conservative to Washington, D.C. to fight for us but change the image of West Virginia.
Tom Willis is a Special Forces Green Beret who spent 26 years in the West Virginia National Guard and now serves as a state senator and chairman of the Judiciary Committee. He says his combination of military, business, and political experience is unlike anyone else in this race.
It always comes back down to the cost of living, affordability, and increasing prosperity for all West Virginians. Talking about infrastructure, and we're talking about education. If we can do those two things right, then families will come to West Virginia, businesses will come to West Virginia, we'll have economic opportunity for our people, and we'll be able to afford the cost of living.
Willis promises to never stop fighting for two things in the U.S. Senate.
Two things I will never stop fighting for in the U.S. Senate are term limits and a balanced budget. I think if we get those two things done, we solve 90% of the problems that are within the purview of our U.S. Congress.
Janet McNulty is a self-published author with a master's degree in IT who currently works in retail. She believes what West Virginia needs in the Senate is someone who will listen to the people, understand their needs, and work to meet them.
As for the single biggest issue, probably the water problem in the southern West Virginia. I've been hearing a lot of people talk about that. It's very contaminated. The best thing I can do in the U.S. Senate, of course, is try to secure funding, federal funding, to try and fix the infrastructure down there.
She promises to push for term limits every single day if elected, saying she has already drafted a proposed constitutional amendment to make it happen.
From the people I've talked to, term limits is an issue they care about because they're tired of having the same people in office over and over again. If you want new ideas, you need to have turnover. So term limits is definitely the one issue I will push for every day.
WTAP reached out to the other candidates and was not able to get an interview. Voters can head to the polls on May 12th between 6:30 a.m. and 7:30 p.m. Megan Marshall reporting, WTAP News.